Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world right now. This is Amrys Wang of the Raw Entrepreneur, and I'm so blessed that I've got Dr. Josie Berg with me and Dr. Emily Yunker as well, who's also like one of my favorite people in the world. And to have the two of them together today to yak and yak, and I'm just going to be the fly on the wall to listen to them, is a real blessing, and it's a chance for me and for you to learn and absorb from these two very, very lovely minds. And the whole point of this in conversation with today is really in response to what's been going on in the world where there's so much censorship going on right now, and everyone's feeling a bit frustrated. So I am going to try not to edit too much out of this. So you're going to hear a lot of boo-boos in here, moving forward with the record button on. But yeah, so hi, Dr. Josie and Dr. Emily.
Hi,
What are we
Amrys.
what
Hello,
are we going to
hello.
say? What are we going to talk today about?
Well, we had gotten together. I mean, now that we're talking about, we started talking about personal development and conscious caregiving. I just wanted to say, I love the conscious caregiving because I feel like I've been on a little bit of a shamanic journey this past 5 days myself. I ended up with a stomach virus, and then that ended up purging me. But then I ended up doing a Shamans Without Borders Tending the Animals program for Earth Day. So I've done about like 12 shamanic journeys over the past 48 hours. So I'm kind of in that headspace. But we were tuning into connecting with species around the planet, including our domestic animals, and where they're at and what we could do to be more conscious of them, and asking them if they needed help, if they had messages for us, and developing a relationship that way on the inner. But I woke up today after going through this and kind of flushing everything out. And this is something for you, Emily. I have been, over the past couple weeks, I've been kind of agitated and felt this inner resistance and agitation. And I've been working on reopening, working on reverence and how I'm going to reopen it and where I'm going to take that. And one of the things that's been bothering me, I finally kind of put my finger on it, was the, I went back to Susan Weed's book, Healing Wise, and she talks about 3 different traditions of healing. And you have the scientific tradition, which we all have had drummed into our heads now for the past 2 years, literally. And then, but there are good things about the scientific tradition. I mean, it helps us heal broken bones, and it allows, like, if you're injured on a battlefield, they will put you back together, or a car accident, then you can put bodies back together. But it's very crisis oriented, and it's almost battle oriented, right? Like you're fighting the disease, or you're killing the disease off with antibiotics, anti-life, or with chemotherapy, which is actually like chemical warfare, or nuclear therapy, which is nuclear radiation. And it's very yang, it's very male. It'll get the job done when you need to get the job done. But then there's the heroic tradition, and that's what's been kind of rubbing me the wrong way, because of course we all have these like comparing ourselves to other people and other people in the profession and what's going on out there, and the heroic tradition is like the alternative medicine, but it's still like, I'm the hero and I'm coming to the rescue to save you from like the mean scientific tradition almost. I have the answers. And that in and of itself has its own issues. And then there's the wise woman tradition, and that's why I've connected with Emily so much, is it's the feminine, where the scientific is like the yang, the wise woman is a total yin. So you kind of sink into being, and you're looking at more like the terrain theory and supporting the body wherever the body is, and nurturing and caring and having compassion for the body, and bringing the spirit in, and the unknown, like the unknown void, and those things, kind of what I was doing with the shamanic journey, is bringing that unknown piece in and allowing the great mystery to come in and heal. And I was listening yesterday, I don't know if any of you have heard of Charles Eisenstein. I posted
Amrys,
on,
you would love him. You should definitely
yeah,
check out
I
his work.
posted he did an interview with Sayer G from Green Med Info, and I posted it on my Instagram and my Facebook yesterday, because Green Med Info is like the heroic tradition, full at work, and then Charles Eisenstein was talking about his wife, who does some type of healing work, and she calls it resonance. Oh, I want to get this right now. It's not resonance. It's like resonant listening, resonant presencing. So she literally holds the field open for that person and whatever that person's patterns are to show up within her healing field. But that field also includes the possibilities of miracles coming in and doing like the rewiring and doing the healing. And she's getting like these miracle results. So it's more like the wise woman herbal way, where you're supporting that being wherever that being is, not
Right.
demanding that being goes one way or another,
Yeah.
And
yeah,
that's
it's like saying you are perfect right here,
yes,
right as you
right
are.
now.
How
Yep.
can we nourish you to increase wholeness? Yeah.
Exactly. And so, that whole thing came together just so strongly for me. And I realized part of it was the very first book of herbal medicine I picked up was Susan Weeds. And then the second book, I think I bought them on the same day, was Ted Kapchuk's The Web That Has No Weaver, which was one of the first books written about traditional Chinese medicine for like the lay person. And I was like, wow, like that's like the foundation of pretty much my practice, not knowing that, not making that a conscious decision, but it was so their philosophies and everything just absorbed into me at a time in my life when I was really open to that. And, that's where I'm, it was just good to find that foundation going forward. So then when I bring things out, it can come from that place. But yeah, so the wise woman. And we had talked about National Spay Day. I don't know if we want to talk about this or not, about the whole spay and neuter issue that's coming up. And some of it really, and I think part of what hit me the wrong way with it was that her heroic tradition part. And that's a lot of the part that's in the holistic animal community, online holistic animal community. So people will jump on things and just take it to the nth degree. So people are out there going, oh, I'm so sorry, I got my dog and cat spayed and neutered and I don't know what to do. And it's like they're taking it on as committing a sin that they did. And that in and of itself just it hurts my heart to a certain extent. But there are a lot of these issues, there's no right or wrong answer. But again, we can go back to the place of where you are. So your animal's already been spayed and neutered. What can we do to support them? Or maybe they haven't been, but what can we do to make sure that their life still goes well? It's a tough thing.
Yeah. Well, I don't even know where to where to respond to that one, because I feel like there's like 6 different entry points to this conversation.
There is. I went back last night to look up Karen. I wanted to see what Karen Becker had put out on the Inside Scoop, because they were really kind of behind the driving force of bringing this up as an issue, right? So you open the doors to something. And she I read what they have posted from the Inside Scoop, and it was really interesting to read because she didn't say to not go out and spay and neuter your dogs and cats at all.
Of course not.
And she didn't right. And she didn't say that every single dog and cat that was even early age spayed neutered is going to have a problem, or even spayed and neutered around 6 months is going to have a problem. And she actually even said in there, there's a lot of animals that don't have a problem, so don't freak out, but that people grab a hold of it and they're immediately just like, wow. You know. So
Yeah,
I think it's
I think it's tricky because I see it all the time in every kind of alternative or holistic community that I'm in. And I actually kind of mentally, because of my background with Susan, I kind of mentally separate alternative versus holistic, because while there's overlap there, they're not really the same in my book.
Well, I'm even trying to get away from the term holistic at this point. I'm trying to come up with something else, whether it's traditional healing or whether it's, you know, because even that is, it's like, I feel like
have a hard time with
grapes have
traditional too,
soured.
though.
Yeah.
Because the word, I hear people use traditional, like, oh, well, traditional medicine means, and what they actually mean is like, most of the people around me are doing this, but in our context, that means
like a tradition
system. Yeah.
And
so I don't like using traditional, because I literally hear people use Western scientific technocratic medicine as traditional, which I guess you could argue it is. It is our tradition in the US to do these things.
Yeah, at the present time, definitely.
At the moment, yeah. And then on the other hand, traditional medicine could mean the tradition of your people of your past, which is cool, but is highly personal to who do you consider the people of your past to be?
Exactly.
Is it your the place that you are, or is it like the genetic lineage, or is it the family that you were around? Like, what do you mean by that? So I find the word traditional to be very, very
it's hard,
confusing,
right?
personally.
Yeah.
But I mean, at least holistic, I sort of know what I'm aiming for. Like, take everything into account, but obviously that's incredibly vague, and you can't literally take every single thing into account. That's not actually possible. So yeah, I have a hard time with that one too. I still like the word holistic, but I feel about it the way I do natural. That you could argue that anything could be argued as natural, and anything could be argued as holistic. And what does it really mean? Yeah.
So I have really difficult.
Not a podcast. I have a blog that I called "Are You Heroic or Are You Wise?" And it was really specifically kind of meant to challenge other professionals in these healing fields to say, no matter how you were trained, because most of us are actually kind of trained in a heroic tradition, how are you choosing to show up for people is really what differentiates are you heroic or are you wise? And I think that most of us aren't really even used to that difference.
Yeah, and it's like, well, because I was just reading her chapter this morning, and it was the tradition she described as a way of thinking, as like an epistemological framework. So you have these three, but then how you act is completely different, because you can bring in knowledge from the scientific, you can bring in things from the heroic, you can bring in things from the wise, you could use them in a scientific action mode, or you could use them in a wise woman tradition mode. So
hugely. I mean, I see that with herbalism, hardcore. Like, I really have to be careful how I engage with herbalism, because you can find, and I sort of tend to jive with, sort of like herbs are for everyone to use. Most of them are safe. You need to know a little bit, but really don't be afraid. Use what grows near you in ways that you can do yourself. That tends to be my approach, which is a very wise one approach. But on the other hand, you probably know what neoplacine is. You can work with bloodroot in ways that are really very, very heroic, and possibly
it's like scientific.
And then you can even take that further and say, well, aspirin is a derivative of a plant, and therefore that's Western scientific herbalism. I mean, you could say that, and you would not really be wrong. And you can take the individual constituents and tear them apart with HPLC and find out which one has the most active, portion, and then parse that out. And people do it. That's kind of how all the CBD products work.
Well, I was going to say is CBD
scientific way to apply that.
Yeah. Marijuana is the perfect example of that, of what they've been doing, and we're watching it in action, going from a plant that grows in ditches that anybody can, you get on the black market, but your average hippie and, you can find it, to, all of a sudden they're isolating constituents out of it.
Yeah.
But there's, pros and cons and side effects to all of that as well, which they forget.
I mean, yes, the more you process it, the more you isolate it, the more likely you are to have any kind of very strong unilateral action. And any kind of strong unilateral action can be a bad match for the individual, or in combination with other things. Yeah.
Yep. And so push it out of balance.
Yeah. And it's not like I'm even opposed to that. I mean, I worked an ER shift last night where we did some pretty intensive stuff to a dog that came in as a stray and needed some pretty major interventions, and he got them, and he's going to be better off for it, and he's going to go on to have a good life with a good foster and a good rescue group. So it's not that I'm opposed to doing big medicine when I need to do big medicine. But it doesn't mean that that's the way that we need to approach most of what we do, or most of the decisions that we make for our pets and ourselves. And really, it shouldn't be. That should be. I mean, I still am into the other part of Susan's book, that same book, which is the 7 steps. Ideally start with step 0 and work up to your 7th step. Ideally, don't start on 7 and work your way back if you can avoid it. Exactly. And it's so much of it depends upon where the individual person is and what, I mean, I feel like, even where they are on their spiritual path, where they are on their thinking and their belief systems has a huge effect too. Yeah. I had an interesting conversation last night, because actually it was while we were doing this crazy long procedure, and you get chatty at midnight when you're supposed to have left hours ago. And the other doctor I was talking to is also, she's my boss. She also works rehab and ER, and so we both kind of have this like pretty broad expanse of stuff to pull from. We're not only dealing within our heads with just kind of high intervention scientific medicine. We also work with a lot of modalities and viewpoints and people. And we got talking about this spay neuter issue, and it's interesting because like one of the things that she brought up was that so much of this comes down to our perception, which is culturally based on what is so-called responsibility, which I thought was a really interesting piece of it. Because like, are we responsible if we get our pets spayed and neutered so that we don't contribute to overpopulation? Yes, I would say that is a definition of responsibility that certainly resonates with a lot of us. On the other hand, are we responsible if we are working to actively improve a breed that we love through careful and responsible breeding? Yes, that is also responsible. And are we responsible if we choose very carefully and consciously our one companion, for the next decade and a half, and want to make every choice we can that is in their best interest? Yes, we are also responsible when we are doing that. And how you define what is a responsible choice there has so much to do with what culture you're in.
Well, but it also, I think it goes back to the individual though. I think it goes beyond the culture. I think culture, we can label something, but it depends upon the conscious awareness of that individual, like the conscious caregiving.
I would say it's your intention. What is your intention? being, you know, the word responsible, you know, there's the cultural input, but at the end of the day, I think it's also what is your intention for the action that you want to do? You know, why do you want to spay?
Yeah.
You know, or why do you want to breed, and how are you going to breed? So,
well, and I think there's a contextual responsibility. So you know, like every single one of those issues you brought up was in a different context. One was a breeder trying to improve the breed. One was a lone animal owner who was like, you know, I don't want to have puppies and kittens, and I'm going to do the responsible thing and help out and not have any. And then the other was a context of having a dog that you're going to be responsible for and make sure they don't get pregnant. But then there's a context of like shelters who are literally overloaded.
Yeah.
I mean, people are in a fantasy world if they don't realize that there's like an animal holocaust going on at this very moment in multiple places around the world. And I, you know, after being one of sitting there euthanizing animals 8 hours a day, boom, fill me up another syringe. Let's pile them up. Let's put them in the crematory. And I say that from my own personal experience, but that alone, you know, there's a lot of people, and you see it with irresponsible pet owners where they're not being responsible for the care of that animal, whether they're spayed or neutered or not. You know, their general health. Are they going to let them run? Are they going to put up that fence and make sure they don't get out? Or is that male dog going to bust out and go after the nearest female dog in heat? So there's a contextual responsibility there.
Yes.
You know,
hugely. I mean, and that's the thing, is that like it's like you have to figure out where you are within this other context. As much as we want to be entirely within ourselves, we are not entirely within ourselves.
No.
And we shouldn't be. We are not rugged individualists. I mean, I've never really thought that was a particularly healthy way to live. We live in community with others, and not all of them by choice. And so the way we choose to live our lives needs to be at least taking that into account, even if we don't make our decisions based upon what other people think, which is not a way to be a happy person. You still live within a context of other people in the world. And they're going to impact you. You can't avoid it.
Well, here's a perfect example with this issue. I knew there were going to be things coming up. So I'm at a client's house in Miami. And Miami is no longer a cheap place to live. And this is in Miami Beach and South Beach. And there's this big dog park down there. And she had her dog at the dog park. And here comes this woman up with, how shall I say it? A bully breed of dog. This is what we're calling them now. And she comes in and she's got 2 intact males and an intact female. And she's so proud because her intact female went into heat today. And she walks into a large urban city dog park with an intact female dog, 2 intact males, and a whole bunch of dogs running around. God knows what their sexual thing was, you know. So it's got South Beach used to be filled with gay clubs, and now we've got like the dog park.
Dog park. People who can't see this video will not see that I'm having like a complete meltdown listening to you talk about this.
And I'm like, this is
like, oh my God, no.
Yes, right. So this is like the biggest, like, you know, the worst case scenario I could come up with. And I heard about it like a few weeks ago. And I'm like, yeah, you know. And down here, we have a lot of the population projects their own sexual life onto their animals, shall we say. There's a lot of men driving around with pickup trucks, and they have like testicles hanging off the boat hitch on the back of their pickup trucks and things like that. So to have a dog with, you know, hefty good amount of testicles hanging down is a big thing down here. Then we had, then you start having a bunch of intact females, and it could be, we're talking about, again, the mix of population, and you don't always get to choose who your neighbors are and who you live with. And there could be a really nice woman who is from California, say, and moves to Florida, and she's got her golden doodle and she's doing everything right for this female golden doodle, and she was walking down the street and such is big bully breed gets over and jumps on that dog, and it's over, and that people don't understand the dog breeding thing either unless you've been around it. I lived in a small New Mexican town in New Mexico, Espanola, and I spayed and neutered 8 hours a day for 365 days a year there. And I don't think I made quite a dent, in the population, but yeah, so there's a lot of issues.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. So this dog that I was taking care of last night, we're calling him Ghost. That's not going to be his forever name. That's his foster name, but his name is Ghost that we call him. I don't know exactly how old he is, like a 5-year-old male intact Great Pyrenees who's been wandering in the woods in this area for literally years. It's actually really common to have Pyrenees as herding dogs around here and guard dogs. And so someone probably intended to leave him intact and have him be a herding or guard dog, and live outside. This is very common around here, but this particular dog just decided that he wasn't defined by someone else's concept of ownership. And just left, and then nobody could catch him because now he's a territorial, fearful, antisocial, intact male dog that weighs over 100 pounds. Probably when he's in full body condition, he'll probably be 125 pounds. And so he's been living in the woods for literally years. And every once in a while, someone will see him and take a picture and be like, hey, someone's dog is missing. And then someone will chime in and be like, yeah, that dog has literally been out there for years. And so, but at this point, finally, somebody realized that the collar that had at some point been a marker of him belonging to somebody, which clearly that ship has sailed, is getting embedded into his skin. And it's bad.
I used to
really
see
bad.
that.
And so a rescue, and so a rescue basically said, we're going to have to do something about this. And so a rescue group has gotten involved, and they spent days and days trying to earn this food every day, and then they started hiding antibiotics in it, and eventually yesterday, I don't know why Saturday, when there was no regular vet open, was the day to attempt this, but they spiked him his treats with acepromazine and knocked him on his butt and dragged him into the ER with no warning. Why this is they decided to go with, I don't know. So yesterday I was treating this dog who's been in the woods for years and has an embedded collar. He has Lyme, Ehrlichia, and I am blanking.
Babesia.
There we go. And obviously he had well over a dozen ticks on him. Who knows how many fleas? I mean, and he's super.
Did you guys just have to shave him? He must have been just nuts.
I literally couldn't. It took me 2 hours just to get the collar unembedded. I couldn't keep going at that point. He was under general anesthesia. And so no, he didn't get shaved. I bathed him, and we will try again with the groomer some other time. And this is leaving an enormous dog that was not well socialized intact, where he just decides to go off on his own. This is not abnormal dog behavior. This is very normal intact male behavior. And so there are real consequences to not making super conscious decisions around this. I would absolutely 100% argue that if getting neutered young would have kept this dog from roaming, it would have been better for him. So
I agree. It's people don't understand. Again, it's like people don't understand. They don't understand an intact, like sexually intact, how dogs are, how they behave, what the health risks are dealing with that. And like you say, that is normal for a male dog. I saw it all the time out in New Mexico, and they would pack up. There would actually be, we would have packs of dogs out there, just like packs of wolves, and they would corner people. We had a little 8-year-old girl killed at a bus stop one morning with a pack of, was a Rottweiler and I think a Chow and another mixed breed. They just tore her apart, you know? So it's interesting. It's going to bring up a lot of stuff. I think, you know, people, and it goes back to education and educating people, but then there's some people I feel like you could talk to them and talk to them and talk to them, and they're so fixated on their fantasy world that they live in, they're not going to hear you, you know.
Yeah.
Sure, you run into that too.
And, you know, I will always say that, you know, I like to say, and it's two sides of a coin, but I like to say, I try to make decisions out of love and fear. And sometimes that can lead us to being very Pollyanna about things and saying, yeah, I'm not going to take my female dog and put her under general anesthesia. I'm just going to be super careful when she's in heat because I love her and I don't want to put her under general anesthesia. And I've heard this over and over and over again. And then a few years later, she gets a pyometra. And I'm not saying every dog's going to get a pyometra, but a life-threatening infection of the uterus that is now an emergency surgery while the dog is unstable, which is significantly worse than having her spayed when she's healthy and young and not having a massive infection and threatening her life. And fortunately, most dogs survive pyometra with appropriate emergency intervention, but not all of them do. And I very clearly remember someone's emotional support dog who did not survive. And she obviously was highly invested in this dog's well-being. This was her emotional support dog. And that dog did not survive. And she didn't put that dog under anesthesia when it was young because she was afraid and because she thought it was better. And when we're making decisions from a place of fear, we are not really making decisions from a place of love. And we have to be able to recognize that those things are related, but they are different.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I mean, yeah, the pyometras are, and that's something I think in our profession, because we haven't had a lot of intact animals, and most people don't see them unless they're working like an emergency or you're working as a shelter vet or in an area where you have these issues. But there's all kinds of things that can happen inside that abdomen of an intact female. And I know, I mean, I spayed enough overweight, middle-aged Rottweilers who'd had multiple litters, and you're in there. It's not a fun surgery to do. It is not a fun surgery to do whatsoever. You know, I just saw a post on Facebook where they were talking about some vet was saying, well, is it my family's giving me a hard time because our clinic charges $1,600 for a pyometra surgery. And I was like, I was doing, and I won't do a pyometra surgery because they're just too hard to do. And I was like, a pyometra surgery was like common, you know, it was like, okay, I've got this surgery, this spay, this spay, this spay. Oh, there's a pyo. Okay. Here's a, you know, fat Rottweiler. Here's a pregnant dog. Here's a hermaphroditic dog. Oh, wow. That we thought it was a male, but now I've got to open up the abdomen and find the ovaries. I mean, I had everything like that. And when you're doing surgery like that, you roll with it, you know.
Wow.
But yeah, you know, I'll never forget, like, one of the pyo I saw, it was actually an owned animal. It was this small little pit, really sweet dog, came in like all wiggly, but hadn't been eating for 24 hours. And I was like, the abdomen was just taut. And I was like, I have to open her up. And I barely nicked the fascia with a scalpel, and there was a fountain of pus. It literally it flew up and like hit the ceiling of the surgery room. And I'll never forget that. I was just like, get the fluids. I think I took like every fluid bag we had in that hospital and just flushed that abdomen out, just flush and flush and flush and flush and flush. The dog survived amazingly. We got her on broad spectrum antibiotics and everything else, but it had burst in the abdomen. It was nasty. So
wow.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
So yeah, I will say that I work with a population through my rehab and integrative medicine practice that has a lot of resources, and they have a lot of education, and they've made some very conscious caregiving choices, and they're highly invested in their pets. And some of them are super into either show or into competition of various kinds, and they are highly invested in improving their breeds. And some of them have these like contracts with their breeders where they have to like wait till they're age because they may be reintroduced into breeding programs. And so some of them, in spite of this, still actually dangers of leaving your pet intact. And some of them are just sort of generally left confused about like feeling very uncomfortable about having an intact pet, but feeling like they kind of have to because of all these other things. And so it's interesting where we are. This is not really a population I was exposed to until I lived in this place doing this particular kind of medicine. And I find myself doing a lot of education around what does it mean to have an intact pet. And it's interesting because this is where that cultural part comes in. And this is why me and my boss were talking about it.
Yeah.
That in parts of Europe, it's really normal to have intact pets because pet ownership is not as widespread, and they don't have these wild dog packs and stuff like that running around because you have to have a license and you have to have a lot of like resources before you can even own a pet. And so having an intact pet is something they actually are a lot more comfortable about. And they're kind of better at it as a result. And here we have this huge pet overpopulation problem, and it became the norm of if you are a responsible pet owner, you were going to spay and neuter. But that also meant that we sort of lost that whole education about how to actually manage an intact pet for long-term health. And then we add on top of that some of this new stuff, which may or not really be new, but we're newly talking about it again, about, hey, there actually are benefits potentially to leaving your dog's hormonal function intact for longer. And now we're in this place where we're like, we don't know how to handle intact animals. We sort of have this like social pressure to spay and neuter. Oh, but now it might actually be beneficial to keep your pet intact, but we don't actually know how to do that. So we're just going to be really irresponsible about it and take our intact pets to the dog park while they're in heat.
It's like this big soup. And then I was reading actually about, and this makes a lot of sense about when you remove all those sex hormones, especially early, and the adrenal glands taking over them, and then the atypical Cushing's coming up. But, I didn't see, when I was in vet school, I graduated in 1998. Cushing's as a disease was so rare that if there was a Cushing dog come into the hospital down below, I remember them coming up. I was in a lab or lecture or something, and somebody from the hospital came up and they're like, you guys come down if you get a chance to the hospital, because we got a Cushing's dog down here. And we know you're studying that and everything else. I mean, I saw it was, and they were sent into the veterinary hospital. Now, I don't know, I can't imagine them not, people say, oh, well, they weren't looking for it. Well, it's really, when you get advanced Cushing's, you got a dog that's pretty, lost all their hair, pot-bellied, peeing all over the place and eating like a maniac. It's kind of hard to miss.
Way back.
Yeah, the sway back and the whole thing. So I can't imagine that, the reason we weren't seeing is they weren't looking at them. And now all of a sudden we get all this atypical Cushing's, which one of the people behind that is saying that the spaying and neutering, it's where the adrenal glands will kick in the sex hormones, and then you get an estrogen dominance. So even though you don't have high cortisol, which will suppress the cortisol, so it'll start out as like low cortisol. My mind was all wrapped up in this last night. Low cortisol with estrogen dominance, but then eventually, and so you have this atypical Cushing's where you get the high sexual hormones, high levels of sexual hormones, and you'll have some symptoms of Cushing's, like they'll lose their hair, they'll get atopic, and they'll have some of the increased urination and things like that. But, and I've been seeing more atypical Cushing's, but I'm just wondering if there
definitely seen
isn't
a few here and there, but I guess I don't have a feel for like how it's changed over time, and whether it's because we're looking more carefully versus not, or whether it's because we have better testing that's more widely available. Good feel for that, honestly.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's just interesting because I've been saying for a long time, I'm like, what is causing all the Cushing's cases? But we were spaying and neutering back in the 90s, I think, just as heavily as we are now. So it's just interesting because that comes in, and now they're talking about, balancing that whole adrenocortical axis with the sex hormones and the cortisone. And that's big.
I'm really fascinated by the whole concept of the sex hormone from various either testicles, ovaries, brain, or adrenal glands. Bone marrow, versus like how do they all interact with each other. I think that's fascinating. Obviously something that we never got into at school. I'm starting to barely learn about it from a human health standpoint.
It's huge in human health.
I'm wondering how much of it is, but I'm wondering how much are we trying to extrapolate for dogs versus how much are we primarily studying in dogs? Because it's kind of different. And I haven't really dived into that, but I do wonder whether we're making some assumptions here that may or may not really apply to dogs, because they don't, they have, or testicles, but they don't, their life cycles are different. So like dogs, a so-called wild dog thing, but like a coyote or a wolf or a fox, they're only going to come into heat once or twice a year at the most. And
the same with our dogs.
Puppies most of the time. Yes, right. And they're going to have puppies, or cubs or whatever, a litter, most of those times. And which is then going to mean that they're going to not have a cycle for a little while before they have another one again. And so really they're probably having about a cycle a year. Versus, and they're having puppies in between, which decreases the risks of certain types of cancer because of the hormones of pregnancy and lactation. So if you take them out of the context, and now you say they're going to have a cycle every 6 months for many years on end without ever having a liver, where they're not having the pregnancy and lactation hormones that counteract the estrous cycles.
They're not completing the cycle.
They're not completing the cycle. I can 100% see how this could potentially set you up for inflammation and chronic hormonal shifts. But I don't know how much we've really actually primarily studied it versus extrapolating from humans. I admit, I don't know this.
That's a really interesting thing, because they're talking about like the ovary sparing space. So then their ovaries would be cycling, but there's no uterus there. And what is that going to do? That's very interesting. We have no idea. That's a whole nother experiment. We have no idea really, except following those dogs. And I think it is, talking, because I really feel like everything's in cycles, and the reproductive cycle, like you say, to not go through the pregnancy and to not go through that, completing that out, I think it really can mess up the system. Huge.
Yeah. Wow. Just because we domesticated dogs didn't mean that we fine-tuned their reproductive systems, because the reproductive systems were still fine-tuned.
They're a mess. I think dogs have like their reproductive systems are a total mess. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, they have a lot of problems. Like when people will be like, oh, I want to breed my dog. And I'm like, you really, really want to do that? You know, or coming in.
Are you sure?
Are people coming in with artificial insemination because their dog won't take? And it's, yeah, crazy.
Yeah. Oh, should I tell my story about Susan and Rose and
yes. Oh, the cat. Yes. And they're not, and you know what, in Karen Becker's thing, they were talking about how cats aren't an issue because they're induced ovulators. So they're not worried about, so yeah, she kind of completely just took cats completely out of the equation because they're induced ovulators. And I was kind of left there going, but why?
But why?
Yeah, but why? Because they're not getting the hormones. So why aren't they getting cancer? And why aren't they having all these effects? You know? Yeah, it made me do that. So tell your story about the cat, okay, because we have to bring the cats in.
So this is one of them is a cat, one of them is a dog. So that maybe confuses the issue a little bit. Okay, so going back to Susan, one of my mentors is Sweden. When I was doing my little apprenticeship with her, she brought up the topic of spay neuter. And I did not bring it up. It had not really specifically been on my list of things I'd like to ask Susan Weed about, because she's not a veterinarian. She's a women's health specialist and herbalist. But she knew that I was going to be a veterinarian, and so she asked me about it. And I kind of told her the brief version of my spiel, that while I can see that for an individual there may be some benefits to staying intact for longer, that there are also some behavioral concerns, and so there's some other health concerns associated with leaving them intact longer. And from a population standpoint, I find that with the particular overpopulation issue that we're having in the US right now, and really for the foreseeable future, I still am very strongly supportive of spay and neuter at a fairly young age. And she said that she'd had a really intense conversation with Juliette de Barclay-Levy, right, who is arguably the grandmother of veterinary herbalism. She wrote a series of books called The Complete Herbal for Dogs and Cats, The Complete Herbal for Farm and Field, I think.
Yeah.
And then The Complete Herbal for Children and Babies, I think. I'm maybe getting some of the names wrong, but The Complete Herbal of Dogs and Cats, I'm sure about, because I have that one and I use it all the time.
Yeah.
And she was a very fiery little Italian woman who lived in the Mediterranean and raised her beautiful Afghan hounds and her children on these islands in the Mediterranean where they grew all their own food, and it was beautiful. But also, she was a breeder of these Afghan hounds, and she talks a lot about them in her books. And I don't know how they got on the topic, but at some point, Susan and Juliette got on the topic of spaying and neutering. And it came out that Juliette was pretty adamantly opposed to neutering any of her dogs, that she really felt strongly that they needed to be intact, whether they were directly going to be part of her breed line or not, and that she felt it was for the health of the animal and it was unnatural to take away their reproductive capacity. And Susan, who was a younger, kind of a different generation, and from Texas and California and New York, was very oh, no, you need to be neutering your pet, especially if you're not planning on breeding that pet, because of the pet overpopulation issue. And, that's part of being a responsible human. And then interesting, looking back at it at hindsight, I do also think that Susan also feels pretty strongly about kind of sexuality and being to separate reproduction from sexuality, which I think is another aspect of sort of being a flower child, that she absolutely was in the 60s and 70s. And so for her, being able to control your reproductive capacity was a big deal. And so you sort of two women who are huge in natural health and herbalism and very influential to entire generations of herbalists and women And they are so on different pages about this, like completely different pages. And Susan was the first person I ever ran across who had her cat have an ovary sparing spay. So her cat had a hysterectomy where they removed the uterus and left the ovaries in place. And interestingly, my first thought, of course, was who in the world wants to live with an intact female cat? I would absolutely lose
screaming in heat, like, yeah.
Right.
You only do that once.
Right. Oh. But her cat's a farm cat and goes outside. And so actually Josie and I, when we talked about this the first time, our like guess here is that cat probably actually getting bred, and then her body is basically going into like a false pregnancy without a uterus. And so she gets this long period of time between when she goes into heat, which makes her easier to live with.
Yeah, because the tomcats are going to pick up. The tomcats are probably going to pick up that she's in heat or the hormones are cycling from the ovaries. Absolutely. Oh my God. Wow. That's so funny. Wow.
Yeah. So we've got like these beautiful Afghan hounds on this, teeny tiny Greek island that are like running around free, breeding with everything. And then we've got this like ovary sparing spay cat on this small farm in New York that's apparently getting bred but not having kittens. I mean, like,
it's so funny.
It takes all kinds, y'all. It takes all kinds.
Exactly. And these are like two of the grandmothers of herbal medicine, probably modern day. Wow. Yeah. It's such a perfect example. Oh, cool. Maybe we should end on that. Do you guys want to keep going or?
Let's see. I'm trying to think if there's any like really specific direction I wanted to bring up or say. I guess I would sort of end by kind of recircling back around to something that we said earlier and saying that these are choices that are individual, but that have sort of collective consequences. And so when we are making our decisions about what is best for our pet, we also then need to be aware of how we need to take care of the others around us. So if we're choosing to have intact pets, we need to understand how to take care of those pets for their own sake, as well as for other pets and the safety of people in our communities. And that the default really shouldn't be leaving all of our pets intact. That's not a good default.
No.
And that
no.
Yeah. And that needs to be a really carefully, consciously, and I just want to push back against that a little bit, because there's a lot out there right now in the natural pet care community that the default needs to be the leaving pets intact. And I think we need to be conscious about that.
And what's driving that is that fear. It's the fear, and that comes, I think, out of that heroic tradition. It's the fear that spaying and neutering is going to cause cancer. My dog's going to get cancer. It's going to get this. It's going to get that. And oh my gosh, it's going to die. Literally, people's minds will head down that rabbit hole like at the drop of a hat. And that we've got to back that up. Yeah. And again, even the ovary sparing surgeries, like we said, we don't know what long-term effects, you do that to a dog when they're young, and then 10, 12 years down the road, what's going to be going on in their body. So, do dogs go through menopause?
Yes, they do.
Do they?
They do.
Yeah, they probably do. Yeah,
I've met a few dogs. Yeah, they reach an age where they stop cycling, and they do have some weird hormonal changes that kind of happen around that time. And I've definitely met some dogs who've done it. And most of the time they go, at least basically, they have major changes in their social situation. Like, it's a lot like real, like, menopause people. It can be a strain on them when they're going through it. And then once it's over, they seem to be much happier.
I can relate. Once you're through it, then it's like it doesn't matter anymore. There's this newfound freedom. So Interesting. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Emily.
absolutely. Thank you. I'm glad we finally got to do this again. It's been a while. Thank you for
I
hosting,
know.
Amrys.
Yeah, no, most welcome. I mean, coming from, I'm just a pet parent, I do rescue work, so I hear both sides of the story about whether you want to spay or neuter. But I think at the end of the day, you know, what are the resources and education knowledge out there for the pet parent to make a conscious choice? Also, it has to apply to their lifestyle because
Yes.
some, I mean, like nowadays in a very urban situation, like I live in Singapore, so actually sterilization is pretty normal for stray dogs and cats, but you do have people who buy purebreds, dogs as
Mm-hmm.
they call it, and most of them don't think about sterilizing, especially the boys, and
Mm-hmm.
very often sometimes, and then accidents happen. That's
Mm-hmm.
because they didn't realize. Oh, like there was this incident where a couple of my neighbors, they hang out in this like hardcore enclosed area, like a urban little impromptu dog park for their dogs to run around, and they actually saw two dogs, one dog humping another one, and they were
Mm-hmm.
thinking, do you think that just one time they'll get knocked up? Maybe not, right? And then
Oh my goodness.
and then well, the border collie had like I don't know how many, and they had to rehome them. Some kept, but it's basically a very
Yeah.
there's not enough education for pet parents as well. It's really scary that people buy dogs or adopt dogs. It doesn't matter where you buy or adopt, but the fact that you choose to be a pet owner, but you don't read up on not just health, but what is it like to breed a dog, or if you don't want to breed a dog, what's going to happen? Things like that, the social consequences when you're living in an urban environment as well. Things like that. Yeah, so.
Basic husbandry. And
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it just boils down to really like there's so much. It's so easy to get a pet here. You can buy one or adopt one, but most of the time, pet owners don't even know how to take care of them. It
They
doesn't matter
think
whether
it's
it's a
like a
dog, a
it's like a
cat,
stuffed animal.
a rabbit, or one of those exotic pocket animals. Those are the ones that I think get the most abuse because they're
Yeah.
cramped in little cages, and then people just can't be bothered to clean them or whatever, and they suffer so much. And it breaks my heart when I see certain creatures like that, and when I go to people's house, like, you need to think about the environment and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But a lot of people don't think that way, they don't realize that bringing in an animal into your home, it's a responsibility. They don't even know what it means to be a responsible pet owner. They don't
True.
think it. They don't think it. They think, oh, it's just a life. It dies. It dies. I'll just buy another pet for my kid. The hamster died. Get another hamster. The goldfish died. Get another goldfish. They don't value the life, or they don't think why. Like, why did it die? Was it because you did something? You ignored something? Did you learn from it? Um, yeah. So.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I think a lot of people shouldn't be pet owners sometimes.
I've often thought that, yeah, that they need to have a license in order to buy a pet or go through. That's why, like the
mm,
rescues here, you go through an adoption process, right? Where they do educate them and check in. But
yeah, you
here,
try, but I
yeah,
think
you never
rescues are
know.
overwhelmed. Rescuers are
Yeah.
overwhelmed. I mean,
Yeah.
even in Singapore, we try to do best practices, but frankly, honestly, there's so many rescues and everyone's so burnt out most of the time. They just want to get the,
Yeah.
the dog out so they can bring in a new one to foster and, fix and then out again.
I totally
So,
know. Yeah.
yeah, so it's one of those, Henry Ford factory kind of lines, you know, the animals going in and out, and that's
Yeah.
when you get very poor quality pet ownership, I think sometimes. I don't know. But going back to sterilization, actually think that sometimes humans, we should have a law on that here, but we don't, to sterilize certain people sometimes. I mean, I'm saying something that's not politically correct, I know, but some people I meet sometimes in my rescue work, that certain people I think that, oh, you really should get sterilized, but hey, that's just me. That's just me.
Hey,
And
by the time I left the
2:40 in the
shelter,
morning here in Singapore, so I'm allowed to say whatever I want.
by the time I left the shelter in Espanola, I was taking these Mexican drug dealers back, wishing that I could throw them in the freezer alongside their dog. I mean, literally, you get to the point with people, it's like where, like they're taking up space and taking up oxygen and food.
Yeah. I think that's why I like what we're doing, where we are actually, really trying to promote what is conscious caregiving. And it does mean a lot of, contextual, looking at an individual case by case. You can't just use a broad brush, to cookie cut an answer. And I think that's where the next level of being a pet owner, or a mom, a pet mom, whatever you want to call yourself, but really is to be a conscious caregiver for your animals that will hopefully, make your life plus your animal's life together, in an integrated household, how to have the best loving home environment for everyone in the long term. And that's different case by case, home by home.
And hopefully that'll spread out to the whole planet, I mean, we look at how we care. Some people care about small little animals, and look at how, they're the same people that are throwing trash out their car window, or, who cares about what gets dumped in the rivers, or, how we're treating the earth. So it goes out on a larger scale too.
Yeah. So I as usual, listening to my two favorite brains talking together today. Like I said, it's always a blessing to be a fly on the wall here for me. Because I learned so much and I got such a good laugh out of some of the things that you guys talk about. And I look forward to the next time. I hope, it won't be too long again, because I know Dr. Emily is such a busy bee. I don't know how you do it, being a mom, a vet, whatever you do, and you're studying as well. I don't know how you manage it, man, but, respect. But I do miss you. I do miss you. I hope we can have more of these conversations again coming up.
Yeah. She's young.
Me too.
She has a lot of energy. All right, you guys. Yeah. The adaptogens.
It's all that mushrooms, isn't it? It's all that mushrooms.
Exactly.
Great.
Exactly.
Wow. I'm so thankful and grateful that you took the time to listen to this podcast. It would mean the world to me if you could subscribe, download, rate, review, and share this with others whom you care about that may enjoy it as well. Thank you, and remember to be kind to yourself and others. Have a awesome day, everyone.